Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to talk about Commander, Tough Rules, and Cool Interactions, episode 66. Today's episode is going to take a look at a fun little situation that my play group and I ran into a few weeks back, and I thought that it was just odd enough to cover in an episode. And then in a few days, I'll be releasing a follow-up episode that I have found a bonus scenario to further complicate this scenario in a way that we didn't see in our game, but I know that it would confuse a whole lot of players. I cast my Ezuri's Predation, which is a sorcery that says, for each creature your opponents control, create a 4/4 green Phyrexian beast creature token. Each of those tokens fights a different one of those creatures. This card is a really cool way to do a pseudo one-sided board wipe that will not kill any of your own creatures and can kill a lot of your opponent's creatures, typically just the ones that have 4 or less toughness, but you can also do a sneaky little thing where you use this on your second main phase after combat has happened, and maybe your opponents used some of their larger creatures as blockers, thinking that they would survive the combat damage, but now there's an extra 4 damage coming at their creatures that they will not survive. Also, any of the 4/4 creatures that you create with it that survive the fighting are just extra bodies for you to use as blockers until your next turn, and then of course they become more attackers down the line. So let's start to complicate things. While I've cast the Predation and it's on the stack, my opponent has flashed out a Crafty Cutpurse, which is a creature with flash and a triggered ability that says, when Crafty Cutpurse enters the battlefield, each token that would be created under an opponent's control this turn is created under your control instead. So because they flashed this out, it will resolve and be on the battlefield before my Predation resolves. So what will happen when Predation does resolve? How will this replacement effect change things up? I'll propose this as the board state for the situation that we have here. I, as the active player, control 3 creatures. My opponent A, who is the one that cast the Crafty Cutpurse, has 4 creatures, and one of those 4 is the Crafty Cutpurse itself. My opponent B has 5 creatures, and my opponent C has 6 creatures. So my 3 opponents collectively control 4 plus 5 plus 6 creatures for a total of 15 creatures. But my opponent A has 3 opponents, and they collectively have 3 creatures from me, plus 5 plus 6, for a total of 14 creatures. So when the Predation resolves, how many 4/4 green Phyrexian beast tokens will be created? Is it 15 or is it 14? Pause the video if you'd like to reread the Predation again, but I'll give you all a hint for now by introducing one other card that I hope its text will give you a hint as to how this situation would resolve. This card never came up in our game, but I hope that it gives you a little bit of insight as to how this situation will resolve. Commandeer is an instant that has an alternative cost. We're not really interested in that alternative cost, but what it does say that we are interested in is gain control of target non-creature spell. You may choose new targets for it. So Commandeer actually lets you gain control of a spell while that spell is on the stack. So how is that different than the way in which the Crafty Cutpurse will have the tokens enter under opponent A's control? Okay, so the answer is that once the Predation resolves from the stack, it will end up creating a 4/4 creature token for each of my opponent's creatures, which is 15, because those are my opponent's creatures. Not the 14, even though they're entering under opponent A's control. It was I, the controller of the spell, as it resolved. Now, there's more to just making the creature tokens on Predation. It also has them fight. Let's take a look at an example of a typical fight spell, one that was just reprinted in the recent Brothers War set, Epic Confrontation, which is a sorcery that says, target creature you control gets +1/+2 until end of turn. It fights target creature you don't control. This is similar wording that you will see on pretty much all fight spells. It fights target creature you don't control. So does that mean that for opponent A, who had 4 of those 15 creatures, will he not pick 4 of the 4/4 creature tokens that will not have to fight because now he is the controller of the 4/4s and his initial 4 creatures as Predation resolved? How can the 4/4s fight creatures you don't control when you do in fact control them? To answer this, we need to once again reread Predation very carefully. It says, for each creature your opponents control, create a 4/4 green Phyrexian beast creature token. Each of those tokens fights a different one of those creatures. That last sentence about the fight, again, each of those tokens fights a different one of those creatures. So this doesn't place any requirements as to who controls what creatures. We can take a look at the comprehensive rules for what fight means, and it is 701.12a, and it says, a spell or ability may instruct a creature to fight another creature, or it may instruct 2 creatures to fight each other. Each of those creatures deals damage equal to its power to the other creature. So in the rules for fight, it doesn't actually say that the controllers must be different. It's always on the rules text of the individual cards themselves that they add in that little bit. In fact, the game of Magic allows for a creature to fight itself. I've never actually seen it happen in a game, but if it did, the creature basically just does damage to itself equal to twice its power. So in our scenario, opponent A would in fact make 15 creature tokens, and 4 of those would still end up fighting his own 4 creatures that he had as the Predation resolved. Had opponent A used something like Commandeer on my Predation, they would have only made 14 tokens, and they also would have had my creatures fighting 3 of those 14 created, and not had their own 4 creatures fighting the tokens. At the start of this episode, I mentioned that there would be a follow-up episode to this scenario, and for those of you who have stuck around to the end, I'll give you a hint as to what this will involve. What would have happened if I had controlled a doubling season when I cast my Predation? Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you have found this video to be entertaining at least, and I hope that a few of you have even learned something about the crazy rules in this great game of Magic. Have a good one. Ta-ta!